So, John, it's great to see you. And I'm so glad we can have this conversation on politics and the US election and what we're all learning, and to do it with as much of a mindful investigation of ourselves as anything else. It's good to join with you in this.
Thanks, Soren. I feel exactly the same, and there aren't that many people I'd want to have this conversation with, so uh,
Likewise.
feels
We were
perfect.
having this conversation separately, just on a call, I think for probably 2 hours. And I think one of us thought, well, it's interesting that we're going through this learning. Other people must also be go through this learning. So as you watch or listen to this, our intention actually isn't so much that we have any special information or special knowledge or special insights, but it's really to invite each one of us into a journey of exploration. And as life emerges, there's lessons and teachings in every moment
Yeah,
that life
and
shows itself.
just as you're saying that, it strikes me that there aren't that many moments when we all collectively, society in a way, has a moment where everything gets clarified in a kind of extremely binary way, win or lose. Of course, it
Mhm.
happens all the time in sports and stuff like that. And that's one of the reasons to have, sports is to, root for teams and then you win or you lose and you learn and you grow and there's always the next season. So there's a certain way in which this is a real lesson in wakefulness and in wisdom to just listen deeply to how we're feeling, and then to
Yeah.
trust that we can actually hold how we're feeling in ways that embody wisdom rather than falling into a certain kind of angry dualisms or despair or anything like that, because the mind is creating so many totally untrue narratives of what the future is going to be like because we're no good at predicting the future. While there may be a lot of fear driving that process, I think it's really very healing and stabilizing and re-equilibrating to have a conversation like this. And as I said, I mean, you're the person that I'd most want to have it with.
Well, thanks. Likewise.
And I
You
have
know,
no idea what I'm going to say either, as usual.
well, I woke up that morning, for me, I felt like for the possibility of us having a woman president was just so inspiring to
Yeah.
me, and a woman of color, like all the better. We've tried men for so many years, and I woke up the morning of the election, I'm thinking, I think it's here. I think the US is actually ready to see what it's like to have a woman president. And Kamala seemed like a very knowledgeable, experienced, kind of thoughtful woman to have elected. And I was kind of texting some of my friends. I'm like, I'm feeling good about this. Now, I live in very much a bubble in the Bay Area. So just the fact that my friends all see the world that I see doesn't mean that that is the way the US sees it. And so I watched it with this certain expectation. And as the information started coming in, and realizing it wasn't that just Trump won barely, which I thought it was going to be a close situation. I thought we're probably not going to know for weeks because there'll be lawsuits and it'll be just so close, it'll be hard to know. And the information started coming in that as long as there wasn't cheating, which we don't have any proof that there was cheating, but if the data is correct, that there was this big move slide towards Trump.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just in white men, it was actually in Latino men. It was in almost just every minority group moved closer from the 2020 election. He increased his numbers. And it kind of first startled me that someone with such his all of his legal problems, the mean thing he said about this group and that group, and there's just so much that he had said that I thought it would really matter to people, that the way he spoke and the attitude he had, that people would be like, I don't want my child speaking like that. Why would I elect a president speaking like that? Like, I actually would like a president that carried himself or herself with a certain nobility and a certain character and a certain honesty. And he did not represent those pieces. And I started to realize maybe that's actually not what people care about, right? Like, actually, I don't think you can look at Trump and say people at least knew who he is. And they chose him because something about him represents values that they hold. And I know a lot of people, there's all kinds of debate about how much was it the economy and how much it was inflation. And people were seeing their prices go up at the grocery store and they were frustrated about that. And I'm sure the political pundits will argue and will have information coming forward in the months ahead that maybe have some more data around that. But just kind of me as a human, I think I realize that people have that the things that matter to me in terms of a certain level of character, I think clearly Kamala had more of those character traits to me, but that people actually have different cares, and that Trump really represented a certain kind of fierce America first. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to protect you, and that seemed to resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah.
What was your experience that day?
Well, I was not a big fan of the Democrats per se,
Mhm.
who were like endlessly asking for money.
Mhm.
And, you know, and I didn't give them any money.
Mhm.
I only supported Movement Voter Project and things like that, you know, we're like getting out the vote in a certain way, because I really feel like the best outcome would come if people who were feeling marginal about things at least got out there and
Yeah,
voted.
yeah,
And while I think, you know, Trump's victory was obviously across the board, as you say, it's also true that, as I understand it, that the popular vote was by the smallest popular vote margin that's ever
mhm,
happened. So
yeah,
yes, there were all these sort of shifts in various populations of people who were expressing a kind of, I think, dissatisfaction with
yeah,
um the whole democratic uh, mentality, so to speak, which
yeah,
often is actually quite condescending and also, you know, I don't know exactly how to put it, a little self-righteous or holier than thou, or like we know what's really good for
mhm,
you, and they may, but they haven't actually delivered that in a way that the majority of the population is understood. And they should have been able to do that because just the, you know, the infrastructure uh, bill put
mhm,
an enormous amount of things in motion that, of course, take years and decades sometimes to feel the benefits of. But that infrastructure bill that the Democrats
yeah,
passed with, I guess, some Republicans, I don't
mhm,
remember, was really something that had the potential to be of benefit broadly for the population. But I don't think people vote on the basis of, you know,
mhm,
a kind of careful analysis of the pluses and minuses. You vote with your feelings.
yeah,
And Trump is a genius at getting into people's heads and
mhm,
staying there. I mean, you know, the fatigue factor around Trump in his first term was just colossal. I mean, he just outlasts everybody, he outtweets everybody.
mhm,
He's just always in your face, and after a while, he's in your head. And I certainly experienced that, and it's like, you know, it's sort of like you can't not pay attention to what the guy's doing because the sense is he's so dangerous. And then all his family members were saying for years and writing books about how dangerous he is. And we, the American people, voted him into office.
And
And
even
oh,
his former chief of staff, his former,
yeah,
key
Mark
people
Milley,
are
the
saying
you know
that
the
he's
Joint Chiefs, the head of the
fascist
Joint Chiefs,
and
everybody is saying these things, and
unfit to be
only
president.
the MSNBC crowd is listening to them.
Yeah,
And maybe that's 48% or 49% of the population. But the other 51% is listening. They're not even hearing that stuff. They don't even know
yeah.
a lot of
And well,
the.
it's also, they don't care. And I think there's a certain group of undecideds that I think look to the liberals and look to the conservatives and even younger generation people. It's like, you know what? I actually feel more affiliation with the conservatives than I do the liberals. And the liberals are too self-righteous, they're too politically correct, they're too into kind of like lack of honesty. And so they feel like I would almost rather be affiliated with this like person who's honest and tells the truth and is, a
Are
little,
you talking about Trump?
yeah, but they
Yeah,
seem to
but
say like,
but uh, the biggest fake of all is that he tells the truth. I mean, he never
yeah,
tells the truth. I mean, but he lies in a particularly interesting way. He's extremely good at it. So he can even, a forum of black journalists talk about Kamala Harris. When did
yeah,
she turn black? Which anybody else like would be like,
yeah,
and that would be the end of their career.
yeah.
And he does one ending thing after another and gets
His polls go up.
nothing but benefit from it. So
Yeah,
he is a certain kind of I think um, nefarious genius
yeah.
that he has like sort of no sense of measured self-regard or anything like that. So it's all like over the top, I, me, and mine about everything, and he thinks he's like the God's gift to creation. But the electorate has actually reinforced that in the face of all his trials and the accusations and the sort of everything that's been demonstrated to be true about him or was going to be brought to trial by the Justice Department. And all of a sudden, all that stuff is obviated. And in part, it's politics because of the Supreme Court saying what they said about, the latitude of this, that in some sense, the president can distort reality to whatever degree he wants. The president can break whatever rules he wants because of this very strange, it's not a law, but it's just a tradition since, I guess, the end of the Cold War that the president can't be, accused of anything or brought to justice while he's president for any malfeasance.
Or
So,
even after I think he's president and you can't
well,
charge
that
him.
remains to be seen, because the charges may still stay, but who knows? But I think the point is that um, the way I read the election is that people are very dissatisfied about what America is or means or its value to me and my family, whatever it is. And this was a vote to say, okay, let's let the other side come in and see what they can do. But all the promises are that they're going to dismantle everything that the middle class and the sort of regular working people need in order to live a better life. And it's a kind of, you can't make it all happen immediately. So the Biden administration was at least trying to move things in the right direction. And now we're going to see what the dismantling process is like and letting the billionaires come in and siphon off, apparently, if they do what they say they're going to do, not billions, but trillions of taxpayers' dollars for schemes that may or may not be of benefit to the United States of America in the global situation we have it now, but it's certainly not going to be of benefit to regular people. And that's the irony of it. And then maybe we'll last 2 years and there'll be some kind of response, at the midterm elections, and maybe things will turn around. This has been going on forever. So I think it's really important for us to not get too alarmist about it, even though it's quite alarming. And it's not exactly what happened in Nazi Germany in the 30s. It's something else. But, I've thought forever that, sort of something's going on between Putin and Trump. From the old days when he was back there doing, whatever those competitions were, beauty competitions
Yeah,
in
Miss
Russia and
Universe.
stuff like that. They obviously have something on him. He feels like every time I listen, this is like the Manchurian Candidate movie, all over again. And waking up so far has been a very challenging process. So I would say that the election is a wake-up call for all the people who voted for Kamala Harris and a
Mhm.
wake-up call for all of the people who voted for Donald Trump. And we'll see how this is going to unfold. And and I think, we have to bridge the divides because it's not like the people who voted for the other guy or the other woman are not just like us. We all have so much more in common than we have different. And so I think the kind of work that you and I do is really meant to connect with what's deepest and best and most beautiful and really what's fundamentally intelligent in humanity as a whole, and that we need to redirect in a way that's not like half the country agrees and half the country is adamantly against it, but to redirect and inquire deeply about how that redirection should be in a way where you got 70 or 80% of people saying, it's a no-brainer. Of course, we have to move in this direction. Of course, we have to take care of the planet. Of course, we have to get away from fossil fuel dependency and things like that because it's going to destroy the possibility of life for future generations. And then you have to believe science in a certain way, but you don't want to be completely, caught up in the science to the point where you reify that as some kind of religion or ideal, because the science can be wrong to some degree too. So you have to kind of go with the flow in a certain way and find the middle path, which is what Dharma and our interest in meditative awareness and the wisdom that's potentially, comes out of a practice like that can offer, where you don't fall into binaries and dualisms of them and us or yes or no for my vote or anything like that.
I do think that though that when it comes down to it, are people really just going to vote for whoever's going to lower their prices so that they can buy more food and they can pay their rent more easily? And I think what Trump very successfully presented himself as is I'm the businessman. I know how to do deals. I know how to cut prices. It was so much better when I was there. And everything else is kind of secondary. And if you look at the level of poverty rates in the US, things are not good for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So for president, so it kind of, to not use the word I like to, trumps all those other concerns about climate change, about a woman's right to choose, about global policies, NATO, like everything, all of that becomes secondary to I actually just want my bills to go lower. And so I think that was a part of it. And there's also a part of it that the Democrats are seen as like they're too politically correct. They've kind of lost themselves, right? Like they're too their attempts to try to placate every little small interest group is like too much. And I don't want, my child getting swayed towards a certain anti-capitalist way or swayed to calling themselves they, or there's this concern, right? That
Well,
like,
these are the culture wars that we're
yeah,
going through in part because things are changing so bloody fast nowadays. It's not just that things are changing fast, they're changing at an accelerating rate. So every 2 years, things are going like 10 times faster. And
right, but like in one group, though, if I speak my mind, or if I say the wrong thing, I'm going to get canceled. Or like, how dare you use
right,
the wrong pronoun? In this other group, I can pretty much say whatever the hell I want to say, and nobody does anything. Like, which group do you want to hang out with? And I think increasingly people are like have the Democrats and liberals in a good attempt kind of lost their way. And I think, Bernie Sanders and others are like, we've lost connection with the working class people, and we've become this group of people that have kind of become disconnected.
well, the word is elite, elites.
Right, but they voted in who's more elite than Trump and Elon in terms of like, wealth and power. So it's not so much that people are against elites, are they? Or they're just against
I mean,
somehow.
I think the word elite to me means like a certain level of education and then pontificating about reality, in a certain way because you've gone to college and Trump and Elon and the billionaires, I don't see them so much as elites, although maybe you could, they certainly are, but I see them more as just, you know, billionaires, entrepreneurs that
Hmm.
see the whole thing as a kind of zero sum game, and they want to get the most out of the casino,
Hmm.
and make it serve their interests. And then a lot of it's in some sense trickle down that yes, we have to placate most people and give them something, but right now we're giving them way too much and we need to take their tax dollars and put them in our, billionaire bank accounts and investment and stuff like that. And yeah, you can make the argument that that's what capitalism does, because then you can invest in new factories and new technologies and then hire people, usually at inadequate wages, but adequate enough so that people, want the jobs and take them. But the model, in a certain way, I mean, I think we have to, in some sense, either develop a capitalism 2.0 that is very different from what we have now, or we need to, go beyond capitalism altogether and find another way to govern ourselves. And I'm not just talking about the United States now, but I think on a planetary level, that maybe, I mean, if you look 100 or 1,000 years into the future, I mean, who's to say that we're going to be governing ourselves the way we've done now? I mean, the United States is less than 300 years old, and what we thought was like a very clever way to maintain some kind of voice of the people, is being corrupted in a way that's going to test how robust democracy 1.0 is. And maybe what we need is a democracy 2.0 that comes goes back to the tax structure of the 1950s, where billionaires were taxed at like 90%. I mean, to
Hmm.
contribute because they have the opportunity to use the society and, extract from the society in a certain way. They have to give back for the price of extraction, so to speak. And that's kind of just gone by the boards, and they pay sometimes no taxes at all. And then Trump, I mean, we elected a guy president who doesn't pay his taxes.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
That's a measure of his genius, because anybody else who had front page articles day after day and investigations of taxes and showing year after year after year that he cheated on his taxes, that would be the end of that
Yeah.
person, but not Trump. And so
No.
there's a phenomenon here that we really have to understand that has to do with delusion,
Hmm.
and that we're all in some kind of collective delusion of a certain kind that's not Democrat or Republican, but it's like, what train are we on that's speeding off a cliff or multiple cliffs, because they call it a polycrisis that planet Earth is facing. And what do we know already in our hearts? What inner resources, never mind outer resources like gas and oil, but what
Hmm.
kind of interior resources do human beings have that we can draw on and then find ways to govern ourselves, just the way the Romans tried with their Senate and so forth and their republic before it became an empire, and try to find, and of course, they killed Julius Caesar. I mean, so it was like murder in the Senate. Uh, but to try to find a sort of much more wisdom anchored way of moving into the future for the sake of, as they say, all beings, or at least for your children or your children's children or their children. And this is not, it's not a trivial question,
Hmm.
because the alternatives are right in our face. And the people who are voting for Trump, for the most part, they're already experiencing it in a way the elites that on the Democratic side are not. So they don't even know how hard it is to get through the day and take care of your children and take care of your family and find a job or keep a job, or, make enough money at the job, or be recognized with some kind of dignity, as opposed to just a kind of interchangeable, widget that can be replaced at any moment. This is a cultural, an opportunity for a kind of deep, I feel, a deep inquiry into the nature of democracy itself, who we are as a people, and can we govern ourselves in a way that is wise and compassionate and is not leading with greed, hatred, and delusion. And the only thing I'll say about that is that, I've myself come to sort of describe in the relationship between individuals meditating, which of course I think a lot of people are going to be listening to this. They know who we are and they meditate with us, or they have their own wisdom practices or cultivation of interior balance in one way or another. And really, those meditative practices have to do with how you govern yourself inwardly as well as outwardly, and move in the world in the face of greed, hatred, and delusion, which are like obstacles to wisdom and fulfillment of a certain kind, or realization, or wakefulness, or however you want to describe it. And that maybe the time has come on planet Earth for us to go through some kind of quantum leap to a democracy 2.0. How we'll do it, I mean, who knows?
Well, we might have to, and the friends and some of my friends voted for Trump, most of them voted for Kamala. But the ones that I talk to who are excited for this new chapter are like, things need to be destroyed. We
Yes,
need to rebuild. It's not ideally how I would want to rebuild it, but the fact that people see intuitively that the whole system is kind of made up, right? And I think that the beautiful skill that Trump has is he realizes it's all made up.
right. And
But
and that,
he's
I
going to
gotta
make it up
say, I
himself.
don't know how I feel even saying this, but they gotta prevent the kinds of stuff that's happening in Ukraine at the moment, the kind of stuff that has come down on Gaza in just like unbelievable form, and now Lebanon and everything else. And it's all about winners and losers, and really good guys and bad guys. And all the
Yeah.
bad guys think that they're the good guys, and all the good guys think that they're the bad guys. And then we have the arms manufacturers are making out like, best business model in the universe, because the more weapons are used, the more they have to be replaced. And
Yeah.
this is insane in all ways, because it's one planet. And so as long as you've got all these inflammatory processes going on and killing people, and then look what happened in World War II. I mean, now we're good friends with the Germans.
Hmm.
What the Germans did is so unimaginable, just completely inconceivable, that one of the highest cultures in Europe could do what the Germans did. And now, 50 years later, 75 years later, we're friends with them. And we
And I
were
guess more
friends with
Jewish
the
people live in
Russians. The
Berlin than any
Russians
other.
were our allies against Germany, and we loved the Russians. And now all of a sudden, the Russians are the problem. The Russians are not the problem. The Chinese are not the problem. The human mind, when it doesn't know itself, is the problem. That's my diagnosis. It's not really my diagnosis, because that's the Buddha's diagnosis. That's all wisdom traditions' diagnosis, is that you create hell rooms when the human mind doesn't know itself, and you create amazing possibility and for well-being when the human mind does know itself, and then learns to govern itself on certain kind of principles, including precepts like no killing. Okay, we
I
just
think though
don't.
that John, I think one of the lessons from this though is this is how I interpret it. The Democrats, you look at the debates and you look at how kind of Obama kind of did his campaigning and other people did their campaigning. One of the things that Obama would say is like he just cares about himself. He just talks about the size of his, audiences at his talks. He just talks about, how much money he made or whatever. We care about you. And look, we're more noble and,
That was the messaging of the on the Democratic.
yeah, to me. And Trump is like, I'm selfish. I care about myself. I
Right.
know you're selfish too. Vote for me and I'll help you be better selfish. Like I'll
Yeah,
help
it's a
you.
genius tact.
Yeah,
And
of
I'm
course I
also
cheat on my
immortal because they
taxes.
can even shoot me and
Yeah,
I survive.
yeah, yeah. And I cheat on my taxes, and I'm going to help you cheat on your taxes too. That was a little bit of the
I mean,
flavor.
if I mean the IRS should really do a study, going forward of like who's cheating on their taxes and by how much, because it's like, that also is part of a democracy is like you pay your taxes and presumably you do not cheat.
Yeah, and I think he's saying he just plays all the loophole, right? Like, of course, I'm going to find every freaking loophole I can to pay as little as possible, and you should do the same. But there's like a self-interest and a self-orientation that seem to resonate with a lot of people, and I
Totally,
think
totally.
some of it is if we actually looked at it from this holistic perspective, they somehow were able to convince us the problems is China screwing us. The problem is that the immigrants are taking over our country. So they made these people out to be, here's the bad people, and if you vote us in, the reason you're suffering, the reason you have higher prices is because of these people and those people and those people. Vote us in,
Yeah.
we're going to handle all of those. We are
You
going
know
to
what
take
that's called, of course. It's called othering.
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 What is never looked at or was not looked at is why have the billionaires in the last 3, 4 years made billions and billions and billions, billions more than the average person who's working, and what is a fair, equitable system for taxation and for paying back to the whole. That is never looked at
And
by
also
either
how much you pay
party.
your workers.
Yeah, by either party, in part because both parties are sponsored by the billionaire class. And so there is this charades that I think is happening potentially, on both parties,
Yeah.
where it's just like, how do we convince everybody else that if you vote us in, we will solve your problem, but without really looking at some of the factors that lead into a system that no matter who the Democrats or Republicans, no matter if they're Democrat, Republican, there's one group that always wins, right? Which is the top wealthy class. Their
Right,
numbers seem to go
right.
up
You win
regardless.
no matter who's in office.
You do. If you control the game, and I don't want to make them out to be bad and wrong, and there's some really well-meaning people in that class, but it seems that the system is kind of built to cater to that group. And I
Well, this
think
is
if
what neoliberalism is all about. I mean, that's exact neoliberal capitalism is all about. It's like, yeah,
so I think if there is going to be some kind of democracy 2.0, and maybe there's a path that we're actually needing to destroy everything to kind of rebuild. It'll have to be some way in which there is benefit to the winners and losers, because I think in any kind of capitalist system, there's going to be winners and losers, and that's just inevitable. And we want that. I think we don't want we want to have a chance for people to work really, really hard, start their own businesses, gain capital, support them. And there's going to be people who don't win. And I think what we've had so far is the winners kind of take all. That it's been set up where the winners get so much and the losers get less. And I think that's the feeling of pain that I think so many of the people in the US feel. They feel that they don't have enough and they feel that there's a lack. And if we could imagine a world that actually addressed that sense of lack, and I think the Democrats did a really bad job of
yeah,
speaking to
yeah.
that pain and to that sense of lack. Trump did. He said, you have a sense of lack, and here's why, and here's how I'm going to solve it. And I don't think the Democrats did, but I also don't necessarily think that the model that Trump presents is going to be anything different to
Well,
actually.
that's the beauty of um, the present moment is that we're going to find out. We're
We
going to
will.
find out. That's inexorable. It's inexorable. It's inevitable. We are going to find out what they are going to do and what they will allow themselves to do, and whether there are any brakes on what they want to do, and whether the system will hold, and whether
Well, and
there'll
I,
even be an election in 4 years. I mean, all of those things are, in some
they're
sense, up
uncertain.
for existential
Yeah.
grab.
And
And
one of the things I appreciate about Trump is that he's willing to take risks. He's willing to break up the system. He's willing to put people in that not everybody's happy with. And I think this is the challenge. The Democrats are so hard to upset anybody, right? They're constantly RFK Jr., love him or hate him, he's kind of a wild one. But the fact that Big Pharma hates him and the fact that he's willing to put him up, I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah,
Kind
yeah.
of doesn't give a shit. And I think there's
And
something.
Mehmet Oz too. And I mean, you know, I mean, it's like, um, let's see, they're all human beings. You know, we may think they're crazy. Uh, their behavior often really looks crazy. But maybe what we need is to see just how crazy they are. It's horrifying to say because, you know, one of the possibilities is like, you know, what we don't want to have happen, first of all, is nuclear war.
Yes.
Okay? And we don't know how close we are to nuclear war in Ukraine. You know, with for all the threats and stuff like that. It's just I don't have any secret, you know, information about it, but like the whole question of whether to start using tactical nuclear weapons if they feel too threatened, the Russians in Ukraine, or just strategically that this is a opportune time to, you know, show our strength. Who knows? None of us know how any of this works. Even if we think we do, or even if you study political science, which I certainly haven't, nobody really knows what's going on. And they give the news what they want the news to know.
Mhm.
And, you know, some investigative journalists very cleverly find out one or two things here that sometimes can be really profound, you know. And of course, Trump spilled all the beans to, you know, sort of, um, what's his name, Woodward. He
Mhm.
spilled all the beans. I mean, it's all right out there in the book. And, you know, there it is in black and white, but it doesn't make any difference. He's like won the lottery, and now we're going to see what they're going to do and whether there are brakes on the system that are going to actually hold enough so that it's not insane. Because as you said, all his senior advisors of the first administration said this guy is like, you know, completely off the wall, totally out of his mind.
Yeah. And I'm
And has
open to the
only
fact
one interest, and that's in his own self-aggrandizement.
and I'm open to the fact that it'll do, I think there's two parts. There's the function of the government might be improved in some ways. I'm open to that. I don't know.
Yeah,
Let's see what
yeah,
they do.
yeah. Who knows how the Defense Department budget
Yeah,
is and whether it should be, you know, tightened or
exactly. Like there's a lot of things that I think need to be rethought, and it's possible that the function of the government improves in certain ways. I think there's
but
that.
the kind of people he's recommending to do it are like, you know,
Are a
they don't
little
have this,
scary.
well,
And
also they don't have the tools and the perspective to be able to do it in any kind of
people voted him in not to bring in sane people who
no,
can keep
I get that,
going.
but you
They voted
know,
him in to like break everything up. So
okay.
I think from his perspective, he's like, well, this is what I was
Well, we'll see.
voted
Right. So
to
that's
do.
right. I was
Um,
voted in to break everything up.
I
But
think so. I mean, he
there's
might
going to
break
be a
up.
lot of pain associated with that.
Yes, yes. So
And the most disadvantaged people are going to experience the absolute most pain
yeah.
because they won't have any sort of protective buffers.
So I do think that there's I'm keeping an open mind about the impact of what that breakup will be, and I'm open to the fact that there'll be changes within the government that will be helpful and supportive, and that he has the guts to do that the Democrats just never had the guts to do. So I'm open to that. I think my biggest fear is that Trump lives in a reality, for example, where he still won the last election. And he's primarily choosing people that reinforce his own narrative that he never loses. And if he did lose anything, it was because there was cheating.
Yeah.
And going into a person who now has that presidential power, has the Supreme Court backing him with that power, lives in a reality again where he never loses and never makes a mistake and never has to admit wrong and never asks for forgiveness. Um,
And
so
doesn't
you
care about anybody except himself,
doesn't
basically.
care about everyone. So you put that with the most powerful position in the world, with a Supreme Court and a Congress and a Senate that's like
You're
that's
making a very depressive case here.
that how will that how will that take form? And why is the universe, if there's universal intelligence, it seems to be bringing that to us? We can argue that this is wrong and
Well,
bad, but
I would say that, in a
like,
certain way, the 20th century, since, maybe World War One or whatever, but certainly World War Two, uh, and the Korean War, which is still, you can see how much pain there is in Korea, even to this very day, in the split. Um, the the future really hangs in the balance, and maybe we need a kind of quantum leap
mhm,
to another way of understanding how to be in wise relationship with the biosphere, with the sun, with the waters. This is like native wisdom in a certain way, with the earth, with Mother Earth, with the sky, with mountains, and with the need to have food for everybody. And so, in a certain way, I mean, the way I think about it is that it's kind of like a final exam for humanity. And the exam is, can we actually recognize that we're all cells of the one body politic? And if you consider your own body, you've heard me say this before, but your body is made up of trillions of cells, more than there are people on the planet at the moment, where we have like maybe 10 billion or 8 billion. But every one of those people needs to be recognized as human, and has needs, okay, that they should decide, not some higher power, but they decide their own needs. But those needs obviously are for, food and shelter and safety and opportunities to find a way to live with integrity in the world in this particular way, without compromising their own cultures, without compromising their own wisdom traditions and so forth. So that means that every human being on the planet needs to have an adequate blood supply, just the way every cell in your body needs to have an adequate blood supply, or you get necrosis, you get, illness and death. And that's true on a societal level as well. So that speaks to a really vast rearrangement of the neoliberal capitalism or communist perspective, to actually re-resource humanity in a much more equitable way, and then see what we're
mhm.
capable of.
But it seems like the only way to really do that is to explore narratives. And I think the
As to
narrative,
what?
explore our narratives, explore
Yeah,
our
that's
stories,
right.
explore our
That's what
identities, right?
Yuval Noah Harari's. It's all
Because
narrative.
the Democrats have a very strong narrative that we're smarter, we're better, we're more righteous. And if we can just get in power, if we could only defeat Trump, everything would be great because we're so smart and we can do everything. And we don't see often that we're the problem,
No, that's a very
right?
arrogant
It's a
perspective.
very arrogant position, and the Republicans have that same arrogance. Like we care about the U.S. We're tougher. Whatever stories and narratives they have of who they think they are, and basically you have Fox News just reinforcing that identity. Look at how bad the Democrats are, and you have MSNBC and other places. Look at how horrible the Republicans are. I think what happens, John, as you had mentioned, is we begin to feel separate. We feel other than, and we feel like we should be in opposition to this other group that thinks differently than us. And the media plays on that because they know, MSNBC knows, and the social media knows, if you say something stupid about Trump, if you're a liberal, you'll click on that. Read this stupid thing that Trump said. Oh, click, click, click. Read this stupid thing that Kamala said. Oh, click, click, click. But it all just serves to reinforce this identity, right? This
Yeah,
identity
and different identities in different
in different
bubbles.
identities, right? But it's the narrative that somehow I'm a this and I'm not a that. I'm the right side, they're on
So
the wrong side.
this is why we do what we do, Soren. I mean, it's the real fundamental problem is the mystery of the I,
Yeah.
not EYE, although that's nice pun on it, but the letter I. And who am I? What do I mean when I say I or me or mine? And this is where sort of the domain of Dharma and the domain of a new way to govern ourselves has real potential. How do we carry ourselves in the world in a way that has integrity and that everybody wants love in the world. Everybody wants to be loved. Everybody wants to, be seen and met and known for who they actually are. And why not let that be a kind of universal currency that everybody has that kind of fundamental right to live the life that's theirs to live and to be seen and honored for who they are.
I think that's true, John, but I think we have to acknowledge that there is a power and a force of identity that runs the world, right? That like when
Yeah.
Trump is campaigning, he's like those liberal activists, we're going to jail them, we're going to suppress them so that we feel superior, right? And the Democrats can do the same thing. So when you ask people to question the narrative they have about themselves, that's probably one of the most delicate, like highly protected aspects of a person that we do not want to look at, right? We want that identity to be reinforced. If I think I'm
Well,
smart,
my experience is that people are actually, at least in the domains that I work in, um, my experience is that people want to, examine the narrative that they have about themselves, especially if it's limiting, and healthcare is where sort of one domain in which we've shown over the past almost 50 years that when people participate in their own healthcare, as opposed to just giving it over to the experts and having a kind of auto mechanics model of medicine, that you can actually, amplify and secure and extend your own health and well-being mentally and physically and socially through what looks a lot like doing nothing. In other words, meditating and then meditating together in groups and then listening and sharing one's experience. And it is revelatory in the sense that it reveals your own sort of beauty in a way that
yeah.
is strengthening, is like, so then, so I'm not prepared to completely write that off as just kind of romanticism when it comes to the larger domains of humanity, because things change in an instant. I mean, look,
That's true.
things can change in no time. I mean, the Shah of Iran had the strongest secret police force in the world at a certain point, and in 2 days he was looking for a hospital in New York City that they wouldn't admit him to because he was like too bad news, our ally for all those years. And we disrupted Iran, through our own political and military machinations to install the Shah of Iran. And then look what we got in return at the end of it in terms of the Ayatollahs and what's going on there now. I mean, everywhere you look, the United States has made, under Democrats, under Republicans, has made wrong choices because of a kind of reduced diagnosis of what the real challenges were, what the real problems were, what the real threats were, and who our real friends might be if we were to nurture a kind of friendship that was authentic. And I
Yeah.
don't know, what I'm talking about is not just a kind of democracy 2.0, but a politics 2.0, or, a re-understanding or reimagining of, as you say, the narrative. What is
I
the
think,
narrative
yeah.
of America, or what is the narrative of planet Earth, or Gaia at this particular moment in time? And, I do think we need to recognize and diagnose or listen to the diagnosis of what's going on with Gaia. Because if
Yeah.
we're making the world unlivable, it's going to be unlivable on all the continents. And whether you're German or Russian or Chinese or American or Canadian or Mexican, we're going to be feeling it to a degree that's really severe. And so this could be a real turning point. But
Yeah.
my concern is that we don't want it to get really, really bad before we wake up. We need a wake up call, but certainly not, a nuclear
I
catastrophe.
think part of that wake up call, John, is to the place of othering, which I think has become so common. It's like, and the identity around othering. I'm a this, all those people are different than me or other than me. And so I'm kind of like, better than them or worse than them, but usually better than them. And then I think there's this other part where if you heard, which I've tried to hear, a lot of Trump speeches about make America great again, and the Democrats do this too. But what's one thing you never hear in that effort? What's one thing you never hear on the Make America Great Again campaign? And the thing that you never hear that I never heard is anything you can do to help make America great again. That's never mentioned. Volunteer, support this cause, like help
No,
with this.
I alone can do it. I
I
alone can
alone
fix
can do
it.
it. You elect me, I will take care of
So
everything. You
it's
can
there's
sit on
really,
your,
an appeal of a dictatorship
yeah, sit on your
of
couch and
one.
eat potato chips and watch Fox News or TikTok all day long, and I will take care of everything. The problems have nothing to do with you. They have complete to do with those people, and I'm going to take out those people. And so whatever we can rethink or reemerge, or I think has to include a sense of us and a sense of agency in the sense that we are co-creating this
We're
world.
on the
Like,
same page on this one, as usual, Soren.
yeah, and we created Trump. I helped create Trump. How did I help create Trump? I helped create Trump by participating in a world where, I think if you look at like both how how the both the parties, I think the Democrats leaned and the liberals kind of leaned way towards the corporate world and kind of disconnected from the average person. So the average working person, where are they going to go if the Democratic Party largely has vacated them, has largely, no longer kind of serves them or is connected to them? Well, you're going to go to anybody who talks about your
Of
problems,
course.
even if he might not be able to solve them. At
But
least
let's
he's
remember, I mean, not everybody did that. The United Auto Workers, very much supported Biden and then Kamala Harris. And
I think they was it. I can't remember which one of the large groups did not support anybody this year. I can't remember which
yeah,
union it was, but
anyway, but it's still very close. It's not like everybody's gone off in that direction.
no.
Uh,
But if you look at the numbers from what I think, he gained in almost every group: young
now,
people, old
agreed,
people,
agreed.
ethnic diversity, Native Americans, Native Hawaiians. Like he didn't win all those, but he
But
gained.
this happens in elections. I mean, from what I understand, I'm not a big student of this, but you get swings going this way and then you get swings going that way. And that's, like, and they happen in
Sure.
the midterms and stuff like that. People vote in the Republicans and then vote them out, or they vote in the Democrats and then vote them out. And
But one thing that's been consistent, though, I think, in that history that Trump is different in, is most of them believed in democracy and believed in that that the people had a right to the vote, and that the people campaigning had an allegiance to accept the results of that election. And I think that's what's different now, is you actually have a leader who
right.
does
Well,
not do
that's
that.
why this may be the end of democracy. I mean, if you believe everything that Trump says, which of course most of it's
Yeah,
lies, so why shouldn't it all be lies? I mean, it started with his inauguration that he had a bigger crowd on the mall than Obama, and it was obviously false because you have aerial photographs of the size of the crowd on the mall, and it was like any idiot could look at that and say Trump's crowd was much smaller.
yeah,
But the thing about lying is the more you say it, and
yeah.
the neocons, under Bush were the same thing. I mean, they were doing the same thing. You lie and you lie and you lie, and after a while, there are weapons of mass destruction in,
Yeah.
Iraq, with Saddam Hussein. And I watched, so Colin Powell lie to the UN, and I mean, you just knew he was lying.
Yeah.
And then it turns out he was lying. But but
So why would Trump care? So you're the most powerful person in the world, right? He wins the election. You're the most powerful person in the world. And all you can think about is, was the size of my audience bigger than the previous?
I mean, all sorts of
What?
psychiatrists have given him various kinds of psychotic diagnoses of one kind or another, or sort of personality diagnoses. He is an outlier. And whether you want to call it genius or nefarious genius or, sort of schizophrenic maniac, but highly skilled and highly functional in a certain way, with all the attributes of that, in terms of like, his wife and, his children. And I mean, they've got a whole culture that they've built
Yeah.
around this meme of Trump. And so he's living in his own reality. And he can deny something as obvious that could be supported by scientific evidence, photographic evidence, and he got away with it. He got
Mhm.
reelected. He can be, indicted on any number of charges that, you know, an ordinary person would be in jail long ago doing 1/10 of what Trump has
Yeah,
been.
and his numbers go up every time he's indicted, it seems.
Yeah, so he is
Yeah.
a certain kind of,
There's a
I
genius
wouldn't
there.
even call it a genius, but he's a certain kind of combination of attributes that makes him, in a certain way, immune to the kind of usual breaks on the system that all of us are subject to.
Yeah.
And he just seems to be completely, free, getaway, scot-free with virtually anything that he chooses to do.
I think, one of the things that I think is kind of interesting about him is most of us kind of live in this reality where, I mean, this went back to when we called John McCain a loser because he got caught, right?
Yeah,
Like generally
right.
you do not
When
criticize
people
veterans,
see
much
something.
less one of the most decorated veterans in America. And Trump seems to be like, you know what? I'm going to play by my own rules. I know that these are the norms, but I'm going to play by my own rules.
Listen,
And
if you're thinking about war, I mean, the Vietnam War never needed to happen. Ho Chi Minh was like, as they say, the George Washington of Vietnam, and that we were in this anti-communist kind of, miasma that
yeah.
killed countless numbers of Vietnamese and over 50,000 young Americans for zero reason.
Yeah.
So there's a certain way in which Trump's genius about seeming to, in some sense, be against war
Hmm.
is actually a potentially good thing. If wars can be ended that are killing people and that also end in a way that doesn't deny people their freedom and their autonomy and their national, sort of culture and heritage, then that's all for the good. And we just have to see whether this is just kind of smoke and mirrors or whether there's some way in which he understands something that we don't. I can hardly believe even saying that, but the fact that he is now in office, we need to sort of hold him to account in every conceivable way rather than just kind of go to sleep and pretend that
But
nothing's happened.
in the Buddha, the Dhammapada, right? The first line of the Dhammapada is the world is created by our thoughts, formed by our thoughts. There's different interpretations, right? But that is the first line of the Dhammapada, as I know it, is talking about how the world is just created by our thoughts.
Yeah,
Trump has seemed to take that teaching in his own kind of nefarious way and use it to his benefit. And so and I know other people have done this, most every administration, the Clinton administration, Obama administration, they all try to create their own spin on things, right? I actually think Trump, it's not a spin. He actually lives in his own, like, it's not like we know this
yeah,
is true.
no, he's not once removed from this stuff. This
Yeah, I
is
don't think so. I actually think
pure
he
primary process thinking.
Yeah, I actually think he believes he won that election. He believes whatever he wants to believe. But there is a certain way in which most of us are like, oh, we're for democracy or we need these institutions. And he's a little bit like, those are just your own thoughts. Those are just your mental models. I'm going to break up everything. And if we're going to take the teaching of him, like let's say he's representing us, he's inviting us to understand something. He's inviting us to see more parts of ourselves. What is the teaching of Trump?
Yeah, I think that's a very generous interpretation of Trump. I'm not gonna go for that hook, however tasty debate. I think, that we've got, some kind of a serious pathology going on that we don't even have a diagnosis for because it's so complex.
Mhm.
But I do take, the people who know Trump, who have been in his first administration or part of his family, and said, this guy, he's not just an outlier, he's in a different universe. And so I think it's very, very dangerous to underestimate how how much of an outlier he might be, and that we need to just be as attentive as possible to what we most care about, and not just go to sleep for the next 2 years or 4 years and hope for the best, but at every point, and hopefully the Congress will do this, and hopefully the Democratic Party will do this, and hopefully, labor unions will do this, and hopefully people in the streets will do it, but he has to be in some sense blocked every time some little step to get us a little bit more pregnant in terms of the destruction of our democracy happens. And I think that's going to be the curriculum for the next couple of years, to the degree that we care to, follow it, as opposed to just tune out and just
But
hope
what
for
if
the
the
best.
majority of the people want that?
Yeah,
The
well,
majority of the
then
voting
we'll
people want
then we'll
that.
deal with that if the majority of people want it. I mean, they'll want it until they don't want it. You want things until you get them. I mean, how many times have you wanted something, then you got
Sure.
it, and you discovered that wasn't the be all and end all of your desires. I mean, the point is there's no end to desire. And desire itself is toxic because it has to do with grasping and clinging and those personal pronouns. More for me. I want, I need, And the question is, what about the we? What about the body politic? What about the fact that we can't survive by ourselves, that we need each other, that people have different skill sets, that, we need our neighbors, we need our family members, we need governance as a body politic at whatever level, city, state, blah, blah, blah. And there's so much good in humanity. I mean, humanity is fundamentally, just a kind of genius emergence on planet Earth. I mean, every single person on planet Earth is kind of a genius of a certain
Yeah.
kind. And part of it is discovering, well, what's your particular brand of genius? And then nurturing that and then offering it to the world as part of a kind of Indra's net circumstance where every facet of every jewel in the net is reflecting every other jewel and facet in the net. And that's a beautiful kind of metaphor for interbeing, for interconnectedness, and that whole question of whether humanity is going to wake up to its truer nature than merely the narratives we tell ourselves that are so often driven by selfing, by I, me, and mining. And, this is where meditative wisdom, meditative compassion really comes into the story, is can we practice that on the cellular level, each one of us as a kind of individual cell of the body politic, but then can we have a larger effect by coming together, even in the way you have curated so many different things while you've been on the planet. That's one of your major functions, is to bring people together and curate conversations and inquiries at this, interface between the wisdom traditions and technology and
Modern society.
everything else,
Do you think
society in general.
do you think we need to understand, because I think a lot of people who identify as liberal or democratic right now are kind of aghast at everything we know about Trump and all his legal problems and all the mean things he said and all the lies and things and the fact that he still thinks he won this election. And that the people, and again, not everybody, but the majority of the people who voted said we want that as an expression. We prefer that. And um, and I think it's just shocking to people who feel like those aren't the values that I represent. And do you feel like we actually need to really understand what is the root of that yes, so that we can kind of move into this next chapter? But there's something that is attractive to him that we need to understand if we're going to move forward in a way that actually speaks to those same people. Do you feel like that's the case, or do you feel like he's kind of just put us in this, he's kind of created this theater and just we fell for his theater. A lot of people fell for his theater.
I actually don't feel it's the case that we have to understand Trump, and that we can even understand Trump in real time. Historians may look back and be able to frame this in one way or another, but while it's happening, I think it's very, very difficult to understand it. And I think we need to not be mesmerized by Trump. If we're too involved with Trump, then we may lose ourselves in the process or be in like, I've got Trump in my head all the time, but then he's already kind of, he's like an invasive species. And he's in your brain, and your narratives are all Trump based, even if they're anti-Trump. And so he's got you either way. And I think so. This is a period of time in which it's really important for us to, one, not lose ourselves and our own integrity in a certain kind of way and what's meaningful to us, and to not just live inside it, but to enjoy it, to marvel at it, and also to defend it if necessary. If it becomes threatened in any way through the education process with our children or our grandchildren or anything like that, that we have to get out of our own little bubbles and start to become activists where it comes to defending principles and practices that we feel cannot be compromised. And when people do that, that's how social movements develop. And it's only social movements that actually transform change. It's the social movement against the Vietnam War, which was like, one of the formative elements of my own, youth, that was a movement against the war that finally, along with a lot of other circumstances, made it obvious that we had to abandon the war. The fact is we lost it, because we weren't fast enough to get out, and we were basically defeated. But it was senseless to begin with. So I think there are a lot of lessons there, and we need to spend the coming years not being so entrained into Trump's narratives and into just reacting to Trump mindlessly. We need to sort of come with a kind of really a learning agenda and see what can we learn from this pathology, and where is the opposite of this pathology? How do we embody well-being, a sense of we rather than me, a larger narrative of what humanity really needs, where China and Russia and Palestine and Israel and and Ukraine, that we're no longer enemies, that we're all basically human, we're breathing the same air, we're walking on the same earth, and we need to stop othering each other and killing each other. John A. Powell is coming out with a book very soon called The Power of Bridging, where it's all about othering, more in a racial context in the United States, but that like we're really good because we're so tribal at like being us versus them, and sort of like, and feeling that the them is potentially a threat to us. They're taking our land, they're taking our food, they're taking our whatever it is. And I think this is a kind of fundamental tribal aspect of humanity that we need to recognize in a very deep way, and then exercise a certain kind of muscle. And mindfulness, I think, is the sort of catalyst for this, where we see the impulse to make the other foreign or distant or threatening in some way or other, including Trump and including all those yahoos, and just recognize that maybe I shouldn't even call them yahoos, but just see with a kind of don't know mind what's going to happen, but calling a spade all along the way, not just putting our heads in the sand for 4 years and hoping for the best, but holding everything to account on the basis of non-harming. When people are being harmed by othering of one kind or another, or being unprivileged because the privileged want to suck all of the blood out of all of the oxygenated blood out of the system for themselves. It's a prescription for disaster in the long run. And in the short run, it's a prescription for, kind of a deep sense of enhanced poverty as opposed to well-being.
Well, I
So
do
I
think
think
that,
that's kind of like from my point of view at this particular moment in time, and I was in some sense reluctant to have this conversation now with you because I don't know how I feel. I'm just discovering how I feel as
yeah,
we're having this conversation. So I don't
yeah.
even know how I feel about making it public because it's information or it's unformed and just unfolding, so to speak. But I do feel that it has to be a process where we do not fall into a kind of black and white, this or that, good, bad kind of metaphorical perspective on all of this, but understand that this is the curriculum. The
Hmm.
vote happened, the election happened. Okay,
Yeah.
this is the curriculum. Now, how are we to understand the curriculum? How are we to learn from it? And not just be complaining all the time that it didn't go the way I had hoped it would. And I mean, why Kamala's side was so compelling. I mean, there were so many ways in which what she
Mhm.
was doing was incredibly compelling to 48% of the people who voted, and not at all compelling to the ones who sat out the election who might have made a difference, or
Mhm.
to the 50% of the people that voted for Trump.
Yeah, I do think that this one of the takeaways for me is just there's a power in othering that is used politically that does not serve the populace at all, but it serves a particular political agenda. And if we can understand that teaching and understand how different political leaders other us, so that we as a human kind of race or civilizations get more and more divided because of largely narratives that they, for strategic reasons, put on us, and we begin to insist on a different quality of leadership and insist on the own agency that we each have to our own lives and to our own families, to our own communities, that my sense could be one of the teachings of this time is
Yeah.
that if we take othering far enough, there's going to be some kind of it's civil war, it's neighbor against neighbor, it's like the Rwanda genocide, which I had visited. I mean, that level of othering taken to an extreme is really, really dangerous and doesn't serve anybody. It might
Well,
serve
and we
briefly.
do not want what happened in Rwanda to happen here.
No, and we're a heavily militarized culture, and we have more guns per person than anywhere, I think, any other country in the world. And so I do think there's a teaching here, John, about can we begin to notice the pattern of othering that shows up around us and the power of identity and narratives, and begin to kind of see clearly and choose
Yeah,
our
and it
own.
happens first in your own head,
Yeah.
and a lot of time we're not aware of it. This is again why mindfulness is so important. You're mindful of the way our own thought processes
Yeah.
unfold and how freighted they are with a certain kind of emotion around the othering, like hatred, like fear, like sort of attributing all sorts of inhumanity to those others or less than to those others. And the only way I know to enter that territory is to become aware of it, to actually
Yeah.
cultivate moment to moment awareness of the narratives that are running through our own minds, and then to be aware of how potentially toxic they are. And
I
then
think that's the
then
path.
then
Yeah.
to change our behavior on purpose, as a kind of uh, interesting exercise, even to sort of like, can you listen to somebody who has, it may be a family member who has the exact opposite perspective on the entire world than you have, and who maybe came out of the same, mother.
Well, I do think, John, this is partly the reason why I wanted to have this conversation, and is that so many of the conversations that are happening now generally are about taking a side. isn't it amazing Trump won? He's going to do all these incredible things. We're joyous. Bitcoin's going up. The stock market's going up, whatever. Or isn't this horrible? How could this happen? What did those idiots do to us? And we're all doomed. And I think there is a way of looking at this, which is just like, what are the fundamental teachings that we can take from this? And how do we navigate a path forward that's, like you said, clear seeing, standing up for what we want to stand up for, speaking out for what we want to speak out for, but doesn't reinforce this dichotomy as human beings of who we are and what we've came to the
Yeah.
earth
Well,
for.
that's easy to say. I mean, but it's really going to be a big challenge for all of us who
Absolutely.
care to actually live it moment by moment by moment. Now, because it really has to be moment by moment by moment, because the thought process is so powerful, and the othering and the emotion that comes along with the othering and knowing that you're right
Yeah.
is so powerful that unless you turn this into a kind of meditation practice in a kind of really formal way where life itself becomes the meditation practice and you realize that you're being driven by your thoughts all day long, but as soon as you push in the clutch, if anybody still drives a clutch car, which I don't, but you disengage the flywheel of the engine, and then all of a sudden the flywheel can be spinning at 3,000, 6,000 RPM, but it's not engaged and it doesn't have to drive you in the direction of othering. That you can just like attend for a few moments and see the actuality of what's in front of you rather than just through whatever colored glasses you're looking at. Now, that is the ultimate meditation practice in a certain way, because you have to be willing to look at your own likes and dislikes and how it actually how they express themselves in your body. So the hatred, like, can feel it in your jaw. Even talking about it, I can feel it in my fists, in my arms, in my jaw, in my wrinkling up of my face. I mean, when, we start to other, it is very somatic. So we can use that in the service of uncoupling all these energies and dissipating them for the sake of a larger vision and a larger wisdom if we stay in the present moment and let these kinds of energies arise, because they're going to arise for sure. But we recognize them, we put the welcome mat out for them, we don't take them personally, we uncouple from them to the degree that we see how personally we are taking them. And then asking, well, is there a way, as John A. Powell is advocating, to bridge,
Mhm.
to actually see the humanity in the other, even if everything that they believe you feel is deluded, distorted, and dangerous. See the Buddha nature, so to speak, in the other, and then find a way to accommodate where you're not surrendering to their racism or any other form of othering or disregard or prejudicing, but you're holding it within the larger sphere of, I mean, after all, and isn't that what Christianity is about? I mean, isn't
Mhm.
that what Christ was all about? I mean, it's like, just turning the other cheek. What is that about?
Mhm.
So it's a source of incredible strength as opposed to just weakness or stupidity, but it's something that has to be cultivated on a moment to moment basis, because our thoughts are happening on a moment by moment basis and they are driving us into these separate domains where we even feel separate from ourselves, the ultimate alienation, and we get lost in a certain way and we no longer, I won't say believe, but no longer recognize, because it's not about believing, but no longer recognize your own validity, your own beauty, your own Buddha nature, and your own uh, belonging on planet Earth. It's a matter of belonging. And if we all belong, then stealing each other's territory or bombing each other to smithereens, including people who cannot defend themselves, at enormous levels of violence, this is something that we need to, that's the curriculum. We need to look at that and we need to ask, is this a prescription for ultimate well-being on planet Earth, or is it a prescription for one potential catastrophic accidental event after another, where the probability is just getting higher and higher, which I think is the case for a big mistake, an unintentional mistake, or just some lunatic, including the one we're talking about right now, if you see him as a lunatic, uh, is capable of, and where restraints need to be in place to make that happen, to prevent that from happening. And I don't
Jon,
know. I mean, if
and
we had this conversation 6 months from now or a year from now, I would have probably felt more comfortable in it because he hasn't even, taken
no,
office.
but yeah, but there's something that's already happened. It's interesting. So there's different components to this, right? So on one level, um, Trump hasn't taken office, and I think we need to, as his, I want to support him in the best ways I can support him in terms of making positive changes. And as an American, I want America to thrive and do well, and I wish him well, and I wish the best for the country. And like I want to have that as my orientation, and I try to have that as my orientation, open, creative mind, and let's see how it emerges.
Yeah, you're way ahead of me on that score. I
Well, I'm
don't
doing my
feel
best. It's a practice. It's a
much.
practice.
But
And
I want to help him because
well, if
I
I
don't think
would,
he's helpable in the way that
so
we're talking about.
okay, that's also possible true, but some of the most impactful criminal justice reform happened during his last administration. Van Jones was involved with that, and they got enormous radical change. Prisoners released that should never have been incarcerated, largely people of color. And so there were
Point
opportunities
taken.
there.
Point
There were
taken.
opportunities there that for whatever reason the Democrats were not able to do, and there was an opportunity, and stuff happened in that area. It
Right.
didn't mean
That's
all
very true.
whole bunch
In
of
that
negative
one
things also
case.
happen. Yeah, and there might be a few other cases. So I do think that if there are openings for the betterment of humanity, we need to join in those. And if there's a door that opens, we need to walk through that door
Right,
or
right.
try to support that door. But I also think it's really important to see, like, all right, in some ways he hasn't got elected, so and people will be watching this video at different times, but we're doing it, on December 5th, 2024. But there's also, in some way, a lot has already happened in the sense that othering has already happened. Demonizing immigrants has already happened.
It's not just that it's already happened, it's been happening forever since the
But
dawn of history, or certainly
and
since this country started.
right, but there was a page that was turned on voting day that I felt like where of course it's happening, but the majority of the people moved us for said yes, we want to keep going in this direction versus the majority of people said no, we want to go in this direction.
Yeah, I think because I'm older than you, maybe I have a
You might
slightly
have
different
a
perspective
yeah,
on it
you've seen
because I
it.
remember Nixon versus somebody named Hubert Humphrey,
Hmm.
who, a lot of people thought Hubert Humphrey should become president, a
Yeah.
Democrat, and he wasn't, and Nixon was voted into office, and in many ways, Nixon was a total disaster.
Yeah.
And finally, sort of left on the, because of the threat of impeachment. Um, but this goes way back. If you study American
Sure.
history, this
Sure.
goes way back, and I mean even pre-Revolutionary War. I mean there were all sorts of different sort of competing strands in the in the colonies before in the Shays' Rebellion of the farmers and so forth. Not everybody had, thought George Washington was the greatest thing that ever, walked on planet Earth. There were like concerns about working people and farmers and who was going to even be part of writing the Declaration of Independence, which was all wealthy landowner white men, many of whom were slaveholders. So, it's like it's always been like this in a certain way. It only more so now. It just keeps
I
getting
guess
that
yeah,
way.
in my lifetime and in my voting lifetime, it's both new and not new, I guess. Like I it feels like from my kind of experience on as a American on the planet. But you're right, John.
And
I
I'm
think
just teasing you about that, because I don't know any more than you know. It doesn't matter when you're born. I mean, you just you see what you see, you experience what you
yeah,
see. And a lot of it is also not just what you experience, what you remember after 20 years or 30 years or 50
sure,
years.
sure.
And it's like, and we're all walking around with kind of very warped, uniquely warped narratives, none of which are true, about the past, and
Yeah,
that influence how we see the present moment and how terrified we are of the future. And I think, everything that we do is really about not getting caught in those kinds of limiting thoughts. They may have some degree of truth to them, but they're not close enough to true enough. They're
yeah,
really not remotely close to true enough because we don't know. And so maintaining this not knowing mind, but maintaining your own uh, moral compass and your own sort of values when it comes to when it's important to say no to certain kinds of things that emerge and put your body on the line if necessary to stand there and do it, and even your life on the line. I mean, this has been going on forever. I mean, the people who were enslaved for hundreds of years, 400 years, 200 before the country was formed, and then or whatever, 260 years, however long it was, they never thought that it was such a great thing, the United States of America, the colonies, because they weren't considered to be fully human. In fact, they were
mhm,
fractionally considered human just for the perspective of white people to get more votes in the southern states because there were more
right,
slaves in
yeah,
the southern states. So, when you talk about American democracy, I mean, it depends on like from whose perspective.
yeah.
And so I just
And
want to
there's a huge shadow to America as there
put
is
in
with
a
all that.
point for, don't know mind, for like staying open and also staying true to every single one of us, to our own beauty, our own love, our own uh, uh, manifestation of life in such a way that we take responsibility for the whole. We may only be one cell of the body politic of the USA or of planet Earth, but we take responsibility for being that one cell or among many. And that when we take care of what we need to take care of, it is of benefit for everybody else, even if everybody else thinks we're crazy. And, 20 years later, very often the people that were thought the craziest, they turn out to be the geniuses. And the people who
Mhm.
thought to be the geniuses, they turn out to be in jail. So I'm just keeping don't know mind about the unfolding of all of this kind of stuff. I have very, very big concerns, if not fears, about how much good can be dismantled in the coming years, and I think that needs to be rejected in every way that we can reject it. And perhaps we're going to also be surprised in certain ways that people that we may have very, very low or nefarious opinions of can actually get certain things done that other people couldn't get done, who we may or may not think of as having all the right tools for doing that as well, because I think all of us need to go through a quantum leap of where mindfulness is concerned and wake up to a kind of reality that's much more about we rather than me, and that's really an ongoing moment by moment challenge.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, I'm with you, John. Maybe that's a beautiful way to end, actually, is that
I,
invitation
I
and
was
that
wondering whether how this was going to come
well,
to an end.
that sense of what can we be responsible for? And I've always liked the thing that we're responsible for our state of mind. We're responsible for the quality of our being in any given
And you
moment.
can't be responsible for anything else if your state of mind is deranged
Yes.
or
Yeah.
other or caught up in othering.
Right. And so the practice, the invitation, the work, the opportunity is uh, is the same as it was before the last election. It's the same it is after the election.
Yeah.
It
But
feels
then we
we need a
created,
little,
well, we did create all these narratives, the the narrative of Bruce Springsteen and the narrative of, all of these
yeah,
performers who were supporting Kamala and the desire to have Kamala actually to have a
yeah,
woman become president of the United States. Who wouldn't want that?
yeah.
Well, it
Turns
turns out
out
a
a
lot
lot.
of people didn't want that under those circumstances.
Yeah, yeah,
And but there was a huge amount of good emerging out of that, and it hasn't disappeared just because election day's
yeah,
over. It hasn't
yeah,
disappeared at all. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we face is nurturing that goodness that is really distributive and not totally dependent on who you voted.
anything. Yeah, it's not dependent on anything.
And the more we can remember that and keep it in the forefront of our consciousness, basically not just day by day, but moment by moment. And it's going to be a real challenge because reading the newspaper can be a source of enormous anger. I speak from, direct experience, and I read the newspaper a lot. But people get their news in different ways. So, I don't get my news on Twitter. And I don't get it in news feeds, in bits and pieces that exclude some things and amplify other things in the way that the algorithms do. So, I think we're all in these bubbles and we need to, it's a beautiful way to end, actually, is the sense that, um, the liberation from the bubble
Yeah.
has to do with awareness. When I often, as you know, use the image of a finger touching a soap bubble, like a soap bubble of a thought or a contracted thought around or feeling around othering or liking and disliking or judging. And it arises in the mind, and you see how powerful and capturing it is. But in the seeing of it, in the awareness, you don't have to do anything. You can certainly not suppressing it, trying to get away with it, but you just touch it like a soap bubble, and it self-liberates, as the Tibetans like to say. It just self-liberates. And if you turn that into a practice, because it's going to rise and rise and rise, lots of bubbles. But over time, you actually, find a space where the bubbles don't arise as much or they don't have the same kind of power over you. And then that's a liberation. I mean, that's real freedom
Yeah.
to expand the degrees of freedom that you're capable of, and then falling into loving rather than othering, falling into connecting rather than disconnecting, falling into uh, joyful spaces rather than anger spaces more frequently, and falling into a kind of um, hopefulness about humanity that I think makes a big difference when you're thinking about how hopeless things are with warfare and all the other forms of injustices, and we have to be hopeful, or otherwise we'll just get so depressed we can't go out and meet the day.
And it would appear that life, at least in the United States, has given us a beautiful opportunity to do that
Yeah, yeah,
in a way.
well, that's right. There's an enormous amount of goodness in being here, not just in the United States, but North America. So everybody's privileged in a certain way, in different ways, to be born into the cultures that they're born
Yeah.
into, because they're all insanely beautiful.
And to live
And
our
the question
dharma.
is, can we actually uh, transmit that beauty and embody that beauty in a way that is infectious and helps other people to be inspired to recognize their own beauty.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll end it there, John. Thank you so much for joining this conversation. It's always interesting to start a conversation on politics and Trump and realize that you're very possibly going to upset a lot of people no matter what you say. And people watching this probably have disagree with us in some ways, agree with us in some ways. And I think the spirit very much that we want to present is we have honor all of our feelings, and it's also an opportunity for our own capacity to know who we are and to know and live from our own goodness. And regardless of what's happening in the external world, whether that's easy or hard, or this person's elected or that person's elected, we still have the same path. And I think, Jon, you did a really beautiful job of navigating and kind of inviting us into that path.
Well, you too. I
Anything
mean,
you want to say,
we're on the same path.
the one path. Anything you want to say as we close this out that hasn't been said yet?
Well, I think it might be valuable to just, if anybody's still listening to this, if it ever sees the light of day, I mean, it might be valuable to take a few moments and rather than falling into more thought, to just drop into the body for a moment or two. And recognizing that silence is a kind of synonym for awareness. That when you drop into silence, in a way, the invitation is to drop underneath your thinking, not to try to shut it off, and your emotions. And just feel the intrinsic beauty and the life flowering inside of your own body. And to recognize that it's not forever, but we do have this moment. And if we learn to inhabit this timeless present moment we call now, then in a way we are letting all of the narratives evaporate for at least a moment or two. And we're already living in a kind of vast spaciousness and intrinsic freedom of mind and heart that cannot be controlled by any government, and that is really a sign of your intrinsic connectedness and beauty. So to not lose sight of the fact that we are all flowers in a certain way, unique flowering of life and beauty, and that the world needs all its flowers, every single one of them, including people who are never, ever going to come anywhere near this conversation. But whoever is listening, to just keep in mind that, we belong in a field of incredible flowering, diversity, diverse beauty. And that difference very often is a profound education and reflection of a certain kind of commonality that transcends all thought and all sense of small-minded self. And maybe that's what planet Earth and the United States of America at this moment in time are calling for more than anything else. And in that sense, the ball really is in our court, and it really is up to us, every single one of us. And if this conversation touches you in any kind of way along those lines, then I'm glad that we've had it and that you've tuned in.
Thank you, Jon.
Yeah, thank you, Soren.